Good morning and welcome to JChats with Bender JCC CEO Josh Bender. Josh's guests today are David Ervin, CEO of Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, and Eva Cowen, Bender JCC Inclusion Consultant.
Good morning, Bender JCC community. I'm Josh Bender, the CEO of the Bender JCC, and welcome back to JChats, which is a live broadcast that we do every Wednesday at 10:30, highlighting and shining a light on individuals in our community who are really making a difference. Honored to have two guests with me today. Eva Cowen, who is a specialist in disability inclusion. She's also a Camp JCC unit head for many years, where she oversees our camp program for teens and young adults with multiple disabilities. She also is the current president of the board of the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes. We also have David Ervin, who is the new CEO of the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, who's joining us for the conversation today. It's wonderful to have both of you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I wanted to start off and get to know each of you a little bit more. Give us a little bit of background about you. Tell us what motivated you to work in the field of disabilities inclusion.
David, take it away.
So thank you. Mine was sort of a cosmic accident, Josh. It was really a necessity out of college. I made the fateful decision not to go straight into graduate school and had very few skills that were worth much. And so I went to work at a local, here in the region, at a local community organization providing supports to people with autism. I had a degree in psychology that qualified me for at least that, and absolutely, and as it turns out, irrevocably fell in love with working alongside humans who have a range of intellectual and developmental disabilities, not so much focused on their disabilities, really focused on the exquisite gifts that they brought to my life and to the communities in which they live, learn, work, and play. So I've been hooked ever since. I'm a classic one-trick pony. This is what I do, and I love it, love it, love it.
Excellent. You've been the CEO at JFGH for about a year now?
Yeah, thanks very much for the new moniker. I'll hold on to that. It's actually, it'll be 2 years, believe it or not,
wow. Oh my gosh.
In May.
Amazing, amazing, excellent. Yeah. Eva, tell us a little bit about your path.
Well, I guess I entered a little bit differently. I was really born into the role of advocacy. I have an older brother who is 6-ish years older than me, who has autism. And when we were kids, there were times when he would get teased and people would make fun of him, and I'd come home and I'd be really angry and sometimes having mouthed off to someone. And my mom said, you know, people are never going to learn what you want them to learn. They're just going to think that you're really bratty if that's the way you respond when people tease him. And so that was just the biggest life lesson at 10 years old that I could have learned about taking people where they are, what experiences they may or may not have had, to use that to just educate people. And she said, if we didn't have Roger in our life, we don't know how we might respond to people with autism. And that whole umbrella opened up for me, even at that age, into, okay, so how do I look at other people that I don't understand? And what do I need to learn to really embrace everybody? So that's how I jumped into it. And really doing it professionally was also thanks to my mom, who begged me to come work at Camp JCC just for one summer, because her good friend Sarah, who was running the camp, needed people who had experience with people with autism. And I said, fine, one summer. And last summer was going to be summer number 35. So that's what happens when your mom asks you to do something.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thanks for sharing that story and that perspective. And that lesson is so instructive when we think about how to advocate and educate others, rather than sort of reacting in emotion or anger. You know, how do we really approach someone who really just doesn't yet understand? So both of you do extraordinary work at Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, professional lay leader. Tell our viewers a little bit about the work that you do, and tell us about the individuals who you support at JFGH.
So JFGH supports more than 200 adults with a whole range of intellectual and developmental disabilities. Common intellectual and developmental disabilities include, for example, autism, Down syndrome. Those are the ones about which we hear the most. And we provide supports in settings that include residential through what I'll call transition, and I'll breathe a little life into what that means, transition supports. And the residential, our name, at least for the moment, is Jewish Foundation for Group Homes. We've just come through an extraordinarily robust strategic planning process. And we've talked to an enormous number of people across the community, both inside and outside of the disability space, to get a sense of how we are perceived in the community. And what we've learned is that folks think that because we are named Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, that that's all we do. We do so much more than that. And so, yes, we have group homes, but we also have folks whose support needs are more intermittent than ongoing. And they live in their own apartments, or they live in their own homes, either with family members or on their own. And we deliver self-determined, sort of chosen supports and services that are custom to the needs and the aspirations of the human, right? And so residential services includes group homes, but it is much, much more than that. And then our transition supports are really designed primarily at the moment, at least, for folks who are nearing graduation from high school and who, like my high school senior, I hope he's not watching, who's trying to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up. And I keep telling him, you'll figure this out in about 10, maybe 15 years, because that's how long it took me, for example. But folks who are graduating from special education sort of have that same dynamic. They're experiencing those same feelings of uncertainty, and I don't know what I want to grow up. I barely know what I want to do tomorrow. And so our MOST project, which stands for Meaningful Opportunities for Successful Transitions, comes alongside that graduating senior in high school to really explore with them what it is that they want to be and do. What are their dreams? What are their aspirations? Our brand new hot off the press mission statement is to support and empower people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to achieve the quality of life to which they aspire. Well, that means that folks get to choose, and they get to dream about becoming whatever it is they dream about. And our job then is to come alongside them, to facilitate their connections to steps necessary to either go on to post-secondary education or to lean into a career of some sort. And so that transition support, which is very active here in Rockville and at 2 locations in Northern Virginia as well, specializes in those transition supports. We look forward to expanding that. Transitions happen throughout life. One of the big transitions that we spend time worrying about here is when folks with developmental disabilities are nearing the end of their career. What does retirement look like for someone with an intellectual and developmental disability who doesn't have a pension necessarily on which they can rely, and whose support needs remain? They're evolving as the human ages. And so we want to look at how we come alongside humans through that transition as well.
That makes total sense. I was talking to a member recently whose son was in our inclusion program for many years, and she talked a lot about the transition of challenges moving out of high school as a young adult, and some of the programming that existed when her son was younger. Now it was hard to figure out what is the next phase, and that makes a lot of sense. Eva, did you want to add to that?
No, I mean, David captured it perfectly. I think one of the beautiful things, though, my brother Roger has been with JFGH for almost 30 years. And I think the wonderful thing about JFGH is that we're evolving. We're, the way we started and where we are now, we're evolving to meet changing ideology, a changing appreciation for, as David said, supporting people with disabilities rather than serving them. When Roger started, that was the idea. We need to take care of people with disabilities. We need to protect them. And, we do offer that, but our mission has changed to helping people live the lives they want to lead, which is just beautiful.
It's sort of supporting and at the same time empowering them as well, right? To realize, their future and what they want to do.
We finally, frankly, Josh, we as a society are working towards embracing the notion that just because the human happens to have a disability doesn't, as it turns out, mean that they don't have goals and aspirations and dreams that they want to fulfill. We are taking an intentionally less parochial view, not parochial, paternal view of supporting people. It's not our job to eliminate all risks, because if that were the case, then I hope someone will start eliminating some of the risks that I face. And yet we know that's not true, that's not realistic. And so we've withheld the fullest expression of living from folks with disabilities out of the sense of paternalism. Well, I think the 21st century invites us to think in radically different ways and in transformational ways to empower. I love your word, you hit on the right word, to empower the human to pursue their quality of life, their aspirations. They're not ours, they are theirs.
It's very beautiful how you describe that. So this strategic planning process, it sounds like a lot came out of it. Could you say a little bit more about what that was like going through that process?
It was extraordinary in mostly good ways, although I don't necessarily recommend strategic planning through a global pandemic. Meeting by Zoom when you're trying to wrestle with some of these fundamental issues of humanity, of what our responsibility is to the community writ large, is harder on Zoom. That said, undaunted by the global pandemic, we talked to an enormous number of people, and all of the feedback that we got, which sort of came together to form a bit of a brand audit, as well as gathering the sense of the community as to where we should be and to where we are headed, was pretty inspirational stuff. And the nice thing is we hold fast to the legacy of our founders. Right? When we were founded, this stuff was unheard of. It was at the cutting edge, the leading edge of innovation. And so we have to hold fast to our commitment to innovation because that's our legacy. And yet, at the same time, we can look into the future to explore beyond group homes, beyond residential supports, the sorts of things that people are telling us that they so desperately want and need in order to achieve their quality of life. So it was exhausting, exhilarating, and completely inspirational. We are loaded for bear.
Amazing. And you mentioned earlier, I think that the fallacies that you're just a residential place, and I'm glad you sort of shined a light on the variety of experiences that you provide and the variety of support that you provide. Give us like a snapshot of what it's like to be part of the JFGH community. Like, what does a day look like for someone who's involved at JFGH? Obviously, we could talk pandemic we're stuck in that, but maybe we could think outside a little bit of pandemic times. And I'm sure it's been a challenging year on many fronts.
I will almost certainly kick it quickly to Eva, who's been around a lot longer than I have been and has such a lovely perspective as both a sibling, as a lay leader of the organization, and having been involved for many years. The beauty of JFGH, the thing that brought me here, for example, is that here we are sort of sat on tremendous natural resources. That's the commitment of a very supportive community. It's access to some of the greatest mind in disability history and disability innovation in the country right here in the DC metro area. So with all of that, a day in the life is, and remember, I'm relatively new, so I'll call myself new-ish, is just relentless exploration, right? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And asking ourselves the hard questions of, are we doing it this way because we've always done it that way? Or are we doing it this way because there's some sort of imperative toward which we're pointing ourselves? The operational details and the logistics management are, particularly in the pandemic, but even pre-pandemic, are absolutely classic human supports, nonprofit agency. We operate in an exceptionally complicated, complex regulatory environment that makes all of us have a big headache, trying to dovetail all of that. So there's some standard stuff, but one of the main reasons I came here is because there's sort of an inquisitiveness within the board and staff of the organization to explore, in fact, what we can become, not necessarily focused on what we are, but focused instead on what we can become. That's pretty cool stuff.
And I think you eloquently refer to sort of that balance of the tradition of who you were and sort of at the same time exploring what the future looks like. And I think in some ways, I think the pandemic for many organizations has been a time to really look within yourself and to begin to think about the why piece, which sometimes we get stuck in our routines of how we operate and don't step back and say, well, why are we doing this? And how are we serving? Yeah, so absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Eva, what would you add in terms of what it's like to be part of the community?
You're muted, Eva.
You know, there's a barking dog next door, so I muted myself. You know, the idea about being part of the community is that being part of the community means you're staff, or you're on the board, or you're someone we support, or you're a volunteer, or you're a family member. So I think that looks different depending on who you are, but I think it looks exactly like what everyone else's life looks like. So the people we support on a typical day, they go to a job, or they go to a day program, or they're retired and they stay home and watch QVC channel, or, you know, they do what we do. And that's our goal, is to help people continue to do what we do. Now, a typical day during the pandemic, I think one thing that we haven't mentioned explicitly yet is that our normal staffing model is that in the group homes where people live, staff will come in for shifts. They might come in the afternoon and get dinner ready and help support people as they get ready for bed. They leave in the morning, people go to their jobs. We've had staff living in for almost 10 months. Some of them have started now to take 2-week breaks, but this is unheard of, not just for us, but in other similar organizations where for 10 months they did not leave, they did not see their own families, they didn't go to the grocery store, they lived in, which also meant their job description changed. They were really, in some ways, a lot like camp counselors now during the day, helping people access their virtual day programs, helping provide structure to people during their days, you know, helping them figure out how to spend their days like the rest of us. So, yeah, I mean, a typical day for them is like a typical day for us, just with a little bit of support.
Unbelievable to think of the staff members, their level of commitment to the work that they do, literally sort of putting their own life aside on hold and their own families to be part of supporting JFGH. It's unbelievable. So I was going to ask you a little bit more sort of how JFGH is sort of navigating the pandemic with, so it sounds like, you know, many of the ways that all of us are trying to cope is very similar to what's going on for the individuals you serve in terms of accessing the virtual activities and experiences. And of course, we're all waiting with anticipation a time when we can get out and begin to gather a little bit more. One question I was thinking about, the family members of the individuals who you support, how do they stay involved in the JFGH community?
So their family members are an extension of, I mean, frankly, they're part of, it's a little corny, but family members of people we support are in fact extended family members of the JFGH community. If I've learned anything through 33 years of a career in this space, it's that setting politics aside, Hillary was right. It takes a village. It takes every one of us pulling in the same direction to advance the issues of advocacy. Like equal rights means equal rights in every way, and equity has to matter. And agencies like JFGH do a lot of formal advocacy, but nothing moves the needle better than moms and dads and siblings and family members. During the pandemic, especially, connections to family have become all virtual. This, for folks we support, every bit as it is for me, is not satisfactory. And so we've had to figure out, how do we engage family members and keep them actively involved in the lives of people they love and who love them through Zoom chats and driveway visits and drive-by horn honking exercises. It has been a colossal challenge. As we look forward to maybe, just maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel here. We are underway, by the way. I'm very happy to tell you that we are underway with our vaccination across JFGH. So in just a couple weeks time here, everybody here will be vaccinated, thank God. And we're looking forward then to how do we bring family members back just as quickly as we can while still preserving our health. That's the first priority. It isn't to reanimate other things. It's really to get families back front and center in the lives of the people we support.
Well said. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to, shift for a moment, if I can. Eva, you wear a number of hats in this conversation today. Obviously, JFGH as a lay leader, the president of the board, and you've, as we mentioned earlier, have been involved in Camp JCC more than just one summer, and 30 plus years, to almost 35 years. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about what you've seen in terms of what the Bender JCC has been able to do in the area of inclusion and advocacy, and sort of what you've learned over the years.
Sure. So the Camp JCC really became inclusive, for lack of a better way to say it, back in 1979. And that was really because Sarah Milner, who was a JCC employee and had sort of a title of inclusion director at the time, but it wasn't nearly that eloquent back then in the 70s. She had a younger brother with Down syndrome, and she herself felt that camp needed to include everybody. And that's usually how these things start, because somebody wants it to happen on a really deep, personal, organic level. So that's where we started. And we started, the way inclusion looked back then is we had a separate program for kids with disabilities, and then a general camp. And sometimes the kids with disabilities would join the regular camp for music or for lunch or for an activity. And quickly, as we did those small increments of inclusion, we said to ourselves, why are we doing it this way? Why are we picking and choosing activities? Why can't everybody just be together? And that's really what happened. I mean, it was basically that simple of a concept. And so we were inclusive before it was the law, which it is now. And so, we were kind of out there on our own, figuring it out. And over the years, we evolved and we continue to evolve. But one of the things that became very important to us early on is that families not pay extra for their kids to come to camp, even if they were getting extra supports, even if it was because of your kid that we had to build a ramp, up to the stage. And we took that on so early and began fundraising. And this is what the Dinner of Champions is about. And we are really one of the few camps in the country that provide inclusion at the level that we do at no additional cost to families. There are other camps doing it, but they pass along the additional cost to the counselors, the family, things like that. I mean, things I've learned have also evolved. One of the strongest, I guess, notions that I've learned is that inclusion doesn't mean blending in. In the beginning, what scared us is, wow, if we include these kids, I mean, they're not going to look like everyone else. And really what I wanted for Roger when I was a kid was for him to fit in, just blend in, not have people notice him, not have people make comments about him. And really a changing moment for me is I had a parent of a 6-year-old with autism who was included in camp. This was in the early 90s, and she wanted to come observe and see what it looked like. And she came and she said, oh, it's breaking my heart. I mean, you can still see that he has autism. And I said, no, that should really melt your heart, because if you look, he's there, he's doing his thing, and he's embraced. We don't want people to blend in. We want people to be exactly who they are. And this now extends to, you have a disability, you have purple hair, you're a different religion, different ethnicity. Be yourself, don't blend in. And the kids learn this lesson. A few years later, we had a camper, we had some senior adults come and do some programming with us, like teach us a game you played when you were a kid. And they were speaking to a group, and we had a camper, we'll call him Josh, that wasn't his name. And he was dancing around in the back of the room, and the senior adult said to the counselor, you need to take that boy out if he can't sit still. And the counselor could not even answer. The kids, 2 other kids stood up and they said, that's Josh. He listens better when his body's moving and he's not hurting anybody. And they were mad. And that just, that shut that down right there. But then those kids came to us and said, how do you invite someone into camp who doesn't get it? And so this is the culture we've created. Come and be you. Don't blend in. So I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, is that that's not what inclusion is.
Nice.
What a beautiful story. And Eva, thank you so much for the role you have played for all these years in shaping the program. I had the privilege of sitting in on our inclusion task force just a couple of days ago, a virtual meeting, as we're planning the coming camp season and focusing on all that we need to do to get our inclusion program in a good place, and recruiting all of our families and working with everybody. Everyone's so excited to come back to Camp JCC after not being able to gather here last summer. So we're coming up on our time, but I wanted to just throw out one more question so we're in February, of course, which is Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. When I think of this moment, this month where we're trying to raise awareness around these important issues, I think of 2 things. One is this issue is critically important, and thankfully carved out a moment in our calendar to raise it up. But at the same time, a month where you need to raise up awareness tells me there's even more work to be done. So what are the opportunities for our community in terms of the advocacy, in terms of getting it to the next level?
I think we need to take it up a notch. And this might not be a popular thing to say, but I'm not a fan of awareness months, any awareness months. And I think what happens is sometimes we invite a speaker to come talk at our synagogue, and they talk, and maybe it's not even a person with a disability, which is kind of a ludicrous idea if you're talking about Disability Awareness Month. And then that's it. And we've brought some awareness. We have been having these same conversations for decades. And I think now it's time that people really educate themselves, and we help to educate people about what it means to include people with disabilities, to get away from the idea of helping people with disabilities, of having people with disabilities be our mitzvah projects, that we want to work alongside, as David said, people with disabilities, and hear from them, how can we include you? People with disabilities need to be on our staff and on our boards and part of the planning process for everything, not just coming to a program. And I think one thing that we can do to help us reframe is to remember that inclusion is a way of operating. It's not a program. And even though we fall into calling camp, we have an inclusion program, it's more of an inclusive mindset.
Thank you for pointing out. It's a very poignant and powerful perspective. I think a really important one. David, did you want to add to either?
Yeah, I think so. There's a J in the organization's name for which I work. There's a J in the organization for which you work. There's a lot of J's here, and together, I think we represent girth and capacity. I think we need to lead conversation. It sort of builds off of what Eva is saying. It's less program, which feels good in a minute, but I'm interested in seminal change, right? And in this community, the Jewish communal organizations in this community, if we came together in common cause, right? So that's a common agenda. We're all pulling for the same things, and you don't have to be a disability-related organization to assert the basic fundamental human rights of people with disabilities. I'm not sure what stops us from seminal change, right? So I love that this morning we hung out together, Josh. This is magnificent. And if there's 10 people out there watching this, or 1,000 people out there watching this, maybe, just maybe, there's 10 or 1,000 sort of moments of initiative, enlightenment. And tomorrow it's coffee time where you and I sit down, and I'm speaking figuratively, and we sit down with Ron over at JCRC, and we sit down with Gil over at the Federation, and we sit down with Todd over at JESA, and together we create an agenda in common to unilaterally assert the basic fundamental rights of humans. I think we can do that, Josh, and I look forward to joining with you and anybody else who will listen to engage in exactly that. That's catalytic change out of Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month.
Well, I absolutely look forward to continuing the conversation, and I want to thank both of you for being with me today. I know I learned a great deal, and I hope all of our viewers have a lot to reflect on and think about today. We'll have to continue the conversation and bring you guys back at some point. So we've had a wonderful JChat today with David Ervin, who is the CEO of the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, and Eva Cowen, who's a specialist in disability inclusion, Camp JCC unit head, president of the board of JFGH, and many other hats in our company. Thank you both for being with me this morning, and I really appreciate the time you gave us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks. See you soon. Thank you.